Welcome to a free masterclass by Onyx Backcountry. I'm hosting along with Jeff, and I'll just do a quick intro and then let Jeff introduce himself as well. So I'm Don Pratt. I'm a product marketing manager at Onyx. I grew up in Israel and have always kind of gravitated towards the outdoors and held many jobs in the outdoor industry. I was a wilderness guide in the Appalachians. I was a dog musher on a glacier in Alaska. I was a geography teacher at an international school in Japan. And I've hiked a couple thousand miles on some national scenic trails, including the Triple Crown, AT, PCT, CBT. And I've done a couple of routes on 6 continents so far, hoping to make it 7 soon.
All right, and I am Jeff Garmire. I have done all things outdoors for 12 years with some more corporate work in between, but I've done the calendar year Triple Crown. I wrote a book about doing that. I've run some races ranging from 50K up to 250 miles at FKTs, up to a few thousand miles long. And I've really just focused on efficiently figuring out the best way to get the most out of the time I have to be out there, whether that's an FKT or having to put very little effort into the planning process of getting out there for overnight. So super stoked to share some of my tips and how I go about planning things to get the most bang for your buck out there.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, Jeff is also one of the most entertaining people to vicariously live through as he adventures outside. So if you don't follow him on the social media, you should, because he is one of the funniest and most humble badasses around. So just had to give you a plug there, Jeff.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the most humble person I've ever met.
Let's kind of get into the meat of this presentation. This is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. I'll just give you a little bit of background about Onyx as a company and what Onyx Backcountry is. And then we'll do a live demo with the app and show you how to plan an adventure. So show you how to create and organize a route and then take your plan into the field. And then after that, we'll do a giveaway and a Q&A. So with that, I'd like to offer folks who are joining in here a special discount for joining us. Thank you so much. For those who are not yet premium or elite members, please feel free to give that a scan, and you can claim a extended 14-day trial for premium or elite, which we don't usually offer, or a 30% discount on a purchase of premium or elite. So feel free to either scan that code or visit that link. I think our MC, Matt, will also throw it in the chat too. So feel free to give that a scan. Okay, a little bit of history about Onyx before we dig in. So the Onyx brand started with Onyx Hunt in 2009. Eric Siegfried, who founded Onyx, wanted to have a view of public and private land boundaries while he was in the field, and he saw that there was no real good solution for that. And he knew that there was accurate GPS capabilities that could be layered onto different geospatial data sets, which could help hunters and also all types of explorers while out in the field. So that's how the Onyx Hunt brand was founded. After many successful years with Hunt, we actually launched a different product called Off-Road. So we utilize Onyx's foundation of accurate land ownership data and as leading GPS functionality, and then bundled that all up and launched an off-road specific app. As far as I know, we're the first to market with this app, which is really exciting. But it helps off-roaders navigate thousands of highly curated trails, and it has a huge trail guide network, thousands of different rich content trails that you can use to off-road with your friends, hopefully. And then that brings us to Backcountry. It's the latest app that we've launched. We've also, bundled up all of these great features from Hunt and Off-Road but also created highly curated content from the adventure project, so hiking project, trail run project, powder project, and even outdoor project, as well as guidebooks from Beacon Guidebook and the Colorado Mountain Club to create a multi-season solution for human-powered adventures. So today, Onyx is over 400 employees in 35 states, and we're headquartered in Missoula and Bozeman. That's a little bit about Onyx. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about Onyx Backcountry, because that's why folks are here. So at a glance, at a high level view, it's a multi-season tool and has almost 800,000 different trails and 27,000 different trail routes, which are rich content routes that have descriptions, pictures, as well as elevation gain, loss, mileage, a lot of deep information about all sorts of trails all over the US, not just for those hiking folks, but also for people going to the backcountry for skiing or snowboarding, or even doing any other snow activities. And we also recently introduced 11 detailed ski guidebooks, which you can also access in the app. We have a lot of other utilities within the app, a lot of different capabilities like taking our maps offline, having public and private land ownership, 70 different types of waypoints. And we'll show you some of these different capabilities as we demo the app. One thing I also want to call out is there are a lot of players in the space, but we are quite different. We kind of have these core tenets of reliability, usability, getting really high quality content, and also focusing on privacy. None of your information is shared with anyone else unless you send them a share link. And we really kind of were founded on that with hunters who really wanted to, protect their sweet stash, or snowboarders who didn't want their powder to get out in the open. And we kind of abide by those core tenets. So we're very purpose driven. And that's also kind of permeated to the way we view the outdoors. So as a company, we obviously we encourage outdoor recreation, but we also want to empower people through stewardship and access. So we are committed to increasing access to 150,000 acres of inaccessible land and building or restoring 150 miles of trail by the end of this year, by the end of 2023. So far, we've secured access to over 76,000 acres of land, and we've helped build 131 miles of trail. So we're almost there, and it's still early days in 2023. So that's a little bit of background about Onyx. But now I really want to kind of get into why we're all here. We're all here to talk about planning a trip. So Jeff, I've been doing a lot of talking. I'd love to hear what you have to say about like at a high level view, trip planning and what goes into your planning process. And then we could talk specifically about where we're going to be planning this trip.
Yeah, thanks for 10-minute intro. Now we're finally to the heart of it. Thanks everyone. And let's dive into the planning process. So kind of, I started just by picking the PCT on a whim 12 years ago. And since then I've really boiled it down to figuring out a few key things that really contribute to how to plan a trip and which one to plan. And it really comes down to, you have to figure out what your goals for the trip are, your duration, your seasonality. And a lot of those can be done through numerous resources online, even the Discover tool on the Onyx app. But then that's when you start boiling it down into kind of what is going to go into the planning process for your specific trip. And that's all before you're even picking a trail. It's like, what kind of elevation are you looking for? Where do you live? What kind of closures are you working with? Seasonality, like this year's a high snow year in a number of places. It's fairly normal in places like Oregon and Washington. So the planning process is kind of like a funnel. It starts with all these big factors. And as you survey options, things you want to do, maybe you have bucket list items, you can kind of cross them off. Like this year, it would be a tough year to do the Uinta Highline Trail early season because it has had an over record snowfall in some parts. And so things like that is really the high level of how I approach the planning process. And it really boils down to, I think number one is the duration. So I like to start with like how long do you have? And in that time, how far do you want to go? And how far away is that? Because can you train and go further and things like that? So it starts with that high level view of what are you looking to get out of the trip? A few other personal factors I like to think about are like, is it going to be some kind of record or something like that I'm going after? Does that have to be something on the horizon? Or I've gotten into more amateur photography in the last 3 years. And so is that something I'm going after? And then are you going socially with other people? Do you need to figure out what works with everyone else's schedule? Are you going for a destination? Like I did the Wonderland Trail last September. That was a huge destination thing. I'd lived around there and wanted to do the Wonderland Trail in its entirety for a long time. So that trip was completely planned by the goal of doing that destination. And then the other two factors are really just like enjoyment. What are you into? And then the last thing is, what have you learned from your past trips? And we'll hit on this at the end on how to focus that is, what have you learned from the past trips on what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy? Because it's a huge thing to realize, well, I really hate off-trail travel. Okay, well, then I think that narrows down. You're not going to be wanting to do a route with off-trail travel, or I struggle with steep uphills or downhills, or I don't like snow or big creek crossings. So all those come into play. And usually from there, you can get it narrowed down fairly well to a level where you're jumping between a few different trails or picking a trail, or at least investigating things like the elevation profile, the current trail conditions, and things like that. And so for this current demo, I think that, so right now, after going through some of those factors, I grew up in Portland, Oregon, which is about an hour from the tallest mountain in Oregon, Mount Hood. And let's say I have a long weekend, I want to go backpacking, want to do a little bit of photography, and I want to enjoy the trail. So that sort of leads right into probably the Timberline Trail in maybe like July or so would be what would target. And that's kind of what we'll go after for the purpose of this demo. But just to reiterate how quickly narrowed it down, it's like, okay, I got 3 days. I'm looking for somewhere that's not going to have too much snow in July. I want it to be somewhere fairly accessible. I can stay with my parents or something on either end. And like, I want to enjoy it. So I don't want something too long for those 3 days. So land among the Timberline Trail for 40 miles. And maybe it's a list you're on and you investigate further with some of the tools that Don will walk through as well. But that's kind of how I typically go about things. And a lot of trips and adventures are really for that purpose of enjoyment and less focused on that, like 8 months away, I'm looking to set a record on a trail. So I think it's really neat to be able to share kind of that insight into how you're picking how many miles, where you want to camp, and things like that. So let's go through those factors now that we've kind of landed amongst something like the Timberline Trail.
Love it. And I'll just pull up the region here on our app so we can get a feel for what the area looks like and what we can expect. And I'll just give also folks a little bit of a quick tutorial about the web map version of our app and some of the functionality. So here's actually the Timberline Trail loaded up in our web map, and you can see the Discover card here, which shows you nearby trails or even rich content trails that have, you know, a description and pictures that help you get oriented to what's around. And, you know, if you, like Jeff said, if you're looking for a destination, for instance, it's really good for finding those hidden gems. But let's just assume that we've established that we're going to do the Timberline Trail. The first thing that I like to do is just get my bearings around the area. So I take a high level view. And what's really nice about Onyx Backcountry is it clumps up a bunch of routes together. So you can have all of the national forest routes or all the routes around a city or a national park. And I can click into those and see what is all in there in the Discover card. And it helps me kind of sort out what, you know, is accessible to me from my point of visiting. So let's assume that we're going to Mount Hood National Forest and we're going to do the Timberline Trail. We can also create a route here or drop waypoints or add pictures. All these tools we'll use throughout the demo, but I just want to call them out here. We also have a compass rose. So if you tilt the map in any way and want to get back up to north or know what direction you're facing, you have a little compass rose to use there. You can zoom in and out below that. And you can also change the map from 2D to 3D, as well as what we're looking at right now is topo lines, but we can go into a satellite view as well and see things from the satellite. And the really cool thing about Onyx is we have some of the best 3D maps I've ever used. And it's especially helpful when you're trying to figure out, like a summit push or doing a trail with a lot of elevation gain or loss. Just understanding what you can experience, what you can anticipate is really helpful for when you get in the field, so there aren't any major surprises. Besides that, there's also the offline maps component, which we'll show you after we finish building our route, but that lets us take all the information that we put on the map, as well as the topo and satellite imagery, and bundle it up into an offline map that then you can use on your mobile phone, which is really awesome. We also have my content, where you can store all of your created content, so waypoints, tracks, areas, lines, routes, etc. And then we also have my stats, which shows you some of the hiking that you've done over the year, which is really cool. I like looking back and seeing how many miles I've kind of put on the feet. So that's a basic kind of overview of all the tools around the map. But let's really jump right into to the Timberline Trail. So
yeah, and let me jump in. This is so when we kind of land on the Timberline Trail here, I think this is exactly when I like, just like you did, jump into the map high level. And this is when the key factors, or the two key factors, that once you land on the trail and you've surveyed the area and figured out, like, I actually want to do this, this is when it's figuring out that the permit situation, and then also that start and end point. So as we start, I don't know, mapping our route and figuring out our plan, this is, I don't know, it's one of the most underrated things, especially when I had to do 200-mile out and back because I didn't exactly know bailout points and stuff like this. So I think this overview and familiarity with the, like, what you're looking at and where the start and end points are, if there's multiple, and making note of them, I think is especially important, just coming from the experience of having to go a bit further than you'd hoped.
totally agree. And to your point about permits, we have a really cool layer here that you can kind of see through these red lines. These are actually private property boundaries. So if you're ever recreating through easements or private public access, you can easily see those on our map. And that's actually an elite feature that we offer. So it lets you see not only the private land parcel, but also the underlying information about it. So you can see who owns that land. This is actually, interestingly enough, one of the biggest timber companies in America, if not the world. And it looks like they own 7,500 acres of forest just north of the Timberline Trail. So probably can't recreate there, but it's good to know where you can and can't go. So just wanted to call that out when we're thinking about permits. What's really nice about the Timberline Trail, though, is that you don't need a permit to recreate in the national forest, specifically on the Timberline Trail. I think you just need a parking pass if you want to park in the national forest. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, just a self-issued permit at I think 3 different trailheads along the place you can get them at. So yeah, it's really why I think it's a cool trail, nice one to do on a long weekend, and why I think it's worthy of drawing attention to as more and more permits and quota systems pop up.
Love it. Awesome. So one thing I also want to call out that's worth doing a little bit ahead of time before you get really into the meat and potatoes of, how long each day will be, how many days, where I'll camp, where I can expect water. I like to do a little bit of kind of like research ahead of time. And a really great resource that I'm not biased at all, but that Jeff has created and curated is Backpacking Routes. And he actually has a Timberline Trail on there as well, with a really nice write-up on what you can expect. And this is kind of like a cheat code for us. Like, we could see what the total trip looks like, what elevation gain or loss we can anticipate, what are some like factors that we may have not considered, like what season to go, or how should I get a permit, or where is it located and what's the best way to get there. So I highly recommend checking out backpacking routes, especially if you're thinking about the Timberline Trail, because there's a really great write-up with tons of information about what you need to accomplish this goal. I will say also that it has a lot of pictures, and sometimes I don't like to have the trip kind of like, sometimes I like the spontaneity of not knowing what to expect. So if you don't like surprises ruined, then maybe don't check out this source. But I think if you want to be really well prepared, this is a great way to ensure that you know what to expect. Anything to add about backpacking routes? I know you're obviously a lot more adept at
Yeah, a bit biased. I mean, the whole goal and the ethos of the site is to kind of add everything in the planning and preparation process, which fits right into this masterclass here, because I think it's pretty hard to have to go to 7 different sites to figure out everything about what season to hike, what's the elevation gain on the site, what's a concrete elevation profile, and what are links to things like permits and such. So the whole goal of the site is to just compile all that in one spot. And we have nowhere near the expertise or the 400 employees to come up with a GPS-based app. So we leave that to Onyx. But I think the goal is to get you out there prepared and ready and knowing fully what the expectation should be of what you're dealing with before you get out there. And then the rest, I think we're diving into next for how to transition kind of that resources, the learning, and the information into actually going on a backpacking trip.
Yeah, great summation. I think they're really well connected, right? Like they complement each other very well to have the written and then looking at the map. What's really cool about Onyx too is we have a lot of rich content trails in our map, including the Timberline Trail. So we have, you can select the trail and see all of those stats as well as a description, and then see some pictures too. So there's lots of great information within our app too, but I always recommend looking at trip reports or, other resources where people have done this before, just to get a lay of the land. But just for the sake of our trip, I think we should just plan it ourselves instead of using the track that's already there. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, let's draw it up. And I always recommend this, and I draw out every route that I do basically very similar to this, because it not only is a way to kind of double check and think through the route, but you also get to see each day and ensure that where you're camping or where you plan to camp is actually legal and things like that. And especially closures, fire, reroutes, high stream crossings, all of these things come up in the planning process because you're literally mapping it out around the route. And it makes it a good way to become intimately familiar with what you're doing. And just as an example, before we dive in, like in this section near Ramona Falls and a couple other places, there's a number of smaller trails and things that intersect. And just knowing that going into the hike makes it a lot easier to know, like, oh, I'm near this area, I should be paying attention to where I'm going. I should be at least having my phone out and knowing what's going on. And so while I'm not a proponent of virtually hiking the hike before you actually do it or running the run, I think it's pretty important to know the problem spots and the areas and things like that. And as you go through this one, you'll see a number of things with names like rivers and stuff. And that is an immediate flag of maybe I should be a little bit aware of conditions and things like that. So I think that's the importance of drawing it initially rather than just downloading a simple GPS, because there's nothing worse than being 20 miles in and realizing you're pretty uncomfortable with a creek crossing and wondering if you should turn around or keep going. So at least you'll go in with enough knowledge to be dangerous.
Yeah, that's a great call, Jeff. And it's very topical for the Timberline Trail because Mount Hood has 12 glaciers on it with corresponding creeks and even rivers from that form off the snow melt from Mount Hood. So there's some very big creek crossings that, depending on when you go, could be treacherous. So knowing when to anticipate them and what the snowpack is really important for trip planning purposes. And actually, I like to do this in Onyx by going to snow mode sometimes. We have this awesome layer here that shows snowtel stations. So you can see surrounding areas. And this is just like a research station that shows you the depth of snow around the spot that you're going to recreate in. And Mount Hood has a couple around them, around it. So it's a really neat way to see, what the snow depth is and what the temperature is. And hopefully by the time it's time to recreate and you're looking to hike, this snow depth chart says 0. But that's just one way to kind of mitigate risk,
Yeah,
which I appreciate.
it's also pretty cool in knowing if you will need to bring microspikes or snow gear of any kind, and also if you need skills of crossing a creek or things like that. So all of this flows right into the planning process, that flows right into what gear you're bringing, that flows right into what skills you should have or practice or be confident or knowledgeable on. So I think that's the cool thing about getting to plan an actual trip, is we can just take it from decided on the Timberline Trail. Now we get to map it, figure out what skills are possible, things we're going to have to worry about, and it flows right into having a successful trip with the right amount of adventure.
Love it. Should we draw it out real quick?
Yeah, let's draw it out. Let's assume we just jumped on backpacking routes and figured out that we want to start at the Timberline Lodge, and let's go from there. Let's start mapping this thing out.
Awesome.
So
I'm just gonna drop a waypoint on Timberline Lodge right here as our start point. This is a really iconic lodge. I think it was the front of it was used in the filming of The Shining.
yep. It's the
So I'll just,
only year-round, I think maybe ski resort in the world, because you ski on glaciers.
yeah, it's pretty cool. I was there in late August and saw people skiing, and it was like 90 degrees, which was pretty wild. Let's see,
Yeah,
what
it's
icon should I use?
you have a
Shelter.
parking. Oh,
Oh,
shelter. You could do
parking,
a
I like.
car. We'll say we're gonna park our car there.
That's a
We
good
can put
idea.
our truck's right there, or car.
There's so many icons, it's sometimes hard to find. I'll do truck.
Yeah,
Nice.
they are alphabetical for anyone out there. That's good at letters.
So we'll put our starting point there. And then we just released this new feature, which I'm pretty stoked about. It's called Route Builder. And what we did was we took all of the trail data on our map, which is over 700,000 miles of trail, and we linked it all together into a route graph, into a routing graph. And now you can actually route by snapping to trails on the map. So it makes creating a trail much easier than it previously was by just like layering on lines. And I'll show you the differences, but it makes drawing the Timberline Trail a 2-step process. I can put a point here and then put an endpoint there. If I
Yeah,
can
and
get it.
what the snap to means is it just follows the actual trail on the map. It's just super intuitive. Just it was a newer term for me, so I thought I'd clarify for anyone else embarrassed they didn't know the snap to term. You may know the feature, but not the term.
Yeah, thank you for calling that out. Yeah, so what it does is instead of creating like a straight line, like a traditional route builder, it snaps right to the trail data and follows it around. So imagine you have to go and trace all these switchbacks here. It would take forever to accurately trace the trail. But what Route Builder does is it just follows the lines that are already on the map, which makes planning effortless. As you can see, I did a 39-mile trail in 3 clicks, which is awesome.
Yeah, and it feeds right into just the elevation profile, distance, everything. So super intuitive.
Yeah, I'm super stoked about this. And it's available on mobile and web. So you can do this on your phone as well. So awesome. We have a starting point and we have our route. That was pretty fast.
Yeah, only a couple clicks. And we have an elevation profile, so we know what we're dealing with, what we got to train for, we got to prepare for. We got to climb to dread, it looks like, up to 7,200 feet. We got everything right there.
Yeah, what's really cool is you can follow along on the elevation chart as well as on the map. from the route that you drew. So you know when the climbs are coming, and you can relate it to where you are on the map. But it's really, it's worth calling out. I mean, there's over 9,000 feet of elevation gain on this trail. That's the equivalent of summiting Mount Hood 1.5 times. So you're actually going to be climbing more than if you were just summiting from the lodge to the summit. Just something
Yeah.
that worth considering.
Yeah, and so now that we know truly what we're working with as far as elevation and distance, this is really when that other tab open where you're looking at possible campsites, or I usually like to crowdsource this online too, especially to see anything recent that someone's done where they camped, or especially current regulations on where it is allowed to camp. And this is when you start working in those campsites. So if it's 40 miles, you say it's going to take a little bit to get up there. So maybe the short day or the first day is a little shorter. Then you have a decent middle day, and then you wrap up for a dinner and a beer at Timberline Lodge. So let's do like a three-day route for this thing. And yeah, I think, yeah, I'll let you orient
Awesome.
us first.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So one question I do have, and I know folks asked this in the chat too. I instinctively drew the route counterclockwise, or sorry, clockwise, because that's the way I've done it. But you can, since it's a loop, you can do it counterclockwise or clockwise. Do you have a recommendation on which way folks should go?
I've always done it clockwise, and it really comes down to there's a couple that let's see, if you follow that elevation profile, you have that long drawn out hill from the low point there, and that can be somewhat of a hot hill and a climb. So it's a little bit, I mean, the net is always going to be the same. It's not going to change because it's a loop. But this is where that elevation profile, you see that that second day is going to be like almost entirely uphill. But there is water in those two little divots. So I think that that's why I like going that direction. And rather than ending with that final climb up to Timberline, if you're tracing it backwards, that's a brutal sandy climb. And so just with personal knowledge of the route, doing some research online, most people go clockwise, and it comes down to, it breaks up a couple climbs a little bit better, as far as those two little water spots in the middle of that long uphill, if you're tracing it there. So you got water there and there. And then if you're going the other way, that last climb is sandy up to Timberline. It's a tough way to finish, versus going clockwise, you get to kind of coast into the finish from the high point. So that is kind of that inside baseball knowledge. It's very doable and decent to go the other direction as well. But yeah, it's completely, I don't know. It really just comes down to a number of factors, what you find online. For me, I do like having to carry less water. And also, this can also be something you figure out as you're mapping out your campsites and what most trip reports are. If I was probably running this, I may want to get that first climb out of the way to the high point while you're fresh, and then get to push it around the west side of the mountain. But overall, this is one that recommend doing clockwise. And yeah, I think the two major factors in direction for everything is really water and elevation profile, because a climb can be a lot easier if there's a creek on it, or a section can be a lot easier if it's broken up with water sources or better spots to camp. And so this direction deciding is something that, as you map out campsites, or as we map out campsites, we may intuitively see what's going to work with our schedule. If we can't get up there until the evening and have a shorter day, maybe it works better to go the opposite direction. But in a high level view, really focus mostly on the water situation and the climbs and how they're broken up.
That was a great answer. Thank you. I'm going to flip into topo mode. I just prefer it for having a little bit more insight onto what's going on in the base map, because it shows you really awesome drainages. You can see some of the water drainages here. So, if I'm worried about what the water situation is like, I can use those to see what's ahead, and to anticipate where I can find water, or maybe even have a spicy creek crossing. I also want to call out that there's some waypoints on the map that you can see, like a waterfall icon, a ski area icon. The ones that I find most useful are actually the campground icons. They give you the name as well as some descriptions, but they also have a URL linking out to rec.gov, so you can actually reserve those campgrounds if they have a reservation system. I find this incredibly helpful when I'm planning a trip that requires pre-planning involved with reserving a campsite. So just wanted to call that out since there was a nice campground right where we're starting and ending. But all that being said, let's plan our first day of the Timberline.
Yeah, let's dive into it. So yeah, I think so it's 40 miles standard, I don't know, 10 or so miles in. Let's sort of see where around that puts us, and we'll see what we want to do for a camping situation as we map this out. So this is when I also like to have a couple tabs or trip reports. There's so much stuff online, and just see as we map around where other people have camped as we get to sort of our mileage goal for this first day. And let's see where we land and see what kind of situation we have for camping.
Love it. I'm gonna just drop some points here and see how far we're going. Okay, so to this ranger cabin, it's 8.5 miles, so almost 10.
Yeah, let's
Probably
go
go a little further. What about here? It's about 10.5, maybe a little less.
Yeah, let's find a creek somewhere in between there, or some water source to make it a little easier to
Look at
camp.
that. A waterfall.
Yeah.
Nice.
What's that? Yeah,
I'm gonna save this as day 1
let's click on that waterfall.
and then we'll click on the waterfall. So this is Ramona Falls. It's a pretty famous waterfall. I think you actually had a picture of it in your description on your website.
Yep, it's a super cool waterfall. So, I mean, with your extra research and finding the icon on the map, I think lands amongst, it would be pretty cool to camp at, see in the evening, in the morning, and be lulled to sleep by the trickle of water. And this is also when those external resources come into play too. And if we dive in a little bit deeper, you see it's illegal to camp within 500 feet of the falls. So no big deal. There are established or primitive campsites about 500, 600 feet from the falls legally. And so this is kind of where the number of tools in planning all come into play. And
Yeah,
really you just have to, I think this is where it's big on drawing the route and doing a little bit of external research as well.
that's a great call out about kind of leave no trace, which we're a big proponent of, and we actually partner with the Leave No Trace organization. But what I like to do when I know that I'm going to try to camp near water is actually use the line tool and measure out and make sure that I'm actually far enough away. So I know that I need to camp at least this far away from the waterfall. I'll move it out to 500 feet or so, which is like, what is that? About 130 yards. Yeah,
Oh
so
yeah.
somewhere around there.
Yep.
So I know that I need to be anywhere here to camp legally to make sure that I'm not too close to water. And that's just a leave no trace thing. So I can actually throw a waypoint down here, discard my line tool, and I know that I'm going to be camping somewhere relatively flat, and I can use the topo lines to determine that as well. I'm sure that I'll find a primitive spot around here because I know it's a popular area, but I'm assuming that I'd want somewhere where the lines aren't too thickly bunched together because that means that it's generally flatter.
Great use of topos. Yeah.
And I'll call this camp on night 1, and I'll make it the same color as our first route, and then save it. What's really cool about waypoints is you can also add them to trips and add photos to them, so you can kind of relive the experience once you get here, and you could either edit this or add a new waypoint and add a photo to it, and maybe take your own picture of Ramona Falls. Okay, so let's say we had an amazing night under the waterfalls, under the stars, got some good sleep, ate some good food. what does day 2 look like?
Yeah, this is probably going to be the meat of our backpacking trip, since it's our only full day. And so, yeah, as we map, we're probably going to want to get maybe in that 13, 16, 17, anywhere in their range, as map around it. And this is when, as you're mapping, you can kind of see some of the creeks and things, and reference that with things online that kind of state possible creek crossing problems, and then work with, there's, I guess this is so high up, it's flowing right off a glacier, but oftentimes there's even gauge data in Onyx as well. So it's pretty intuitive and fully encompassed tool here. Where are we? Oh, now we're facing east now from our campsite, looking at Mount Hood. So actually pretty cool 3D layout here. And so as we map around, this is when I usually like to make a list of a few different campsite options. As you start mapping, you'll see them on the map and decide if it's far enough, if it's too far, where the water options are as you near each campsite. And yeah, we can start, I think, tracing day 2 as we get to kind of our target distance here.
Awesome. Yeah, and I just tilted the map to kind of show the drainages a little bit, so you have a perspective of what you can expect. I've done the trail a couple of times, and I know that the sandy creek crossing can be quite hairy. I actually had someone get swept away for a bit last time I was there. Had to catch them.
I think it's
and that
even
was
called the Sandy River, so it's bigger than a creek. So you should not feel so bad.
Yeah, thank you. I don't feel bad, but I felt kind of scared for the person who got swept away. But yeah, good tip is to if you get to the river and it's flowing too heavy for what you're comfortable with, you could just camp out near it. Make sure you're at least 500 feet away and wait until the morning, because the snow will have time to firm up during lower temperatures at night, and hopefully the flow isn't as crazy as when you arrive. So just wanted to call that out, but the Timberline has a ton of these drainages, so you can expect them throughout. But you have a good vantage point here of what you can expect.
Yeah, and as we map this, I think it's really cool to hit on something like the Sandy River initially, because as we mapped and looked at the overview, and if we zoomed in further, we would see that most of these drainages are much bigger on the west, just intuitively coming off towards the ocean there. And you have like the Zigzag River and the Sandy, and that Ramona Falls spot is right before a decent crossing. And also crossing some of these rivers when you're more fresh. The east side has less rivers. I think it just adds in a little bit of safety, and just another factor and a reason why doing an overview, whether you do this in 20 minutes or take a couple hours or a couple weeks, I think it's just really good to know what you're dealing with. And then this flows right into knowing what skills you might need to know, whether we talked about snow a little bit, and now we've hit on that there's drainages, there's even things called rivers. So brushing up or knowing a little bit about how to cross them, if you're comfortable with the people you're crossing, if there's another group you'd feel better crossing them with, or even Googling things like, is there a log across the muddy fork? In fact, there is, but things like that, as you map it, these are really good things to have questions about. And I often go into the end of a planning process with 4 or 5 questions I want to answer, like what's the snow situation going to be? What's the flow going to be the week of my hike? And so I revisit those right when I'm ready to go. So it teaches us the skills we're going to need out there, and fully expect to have wet feet, because it looks like we're going to be crossing rivers.
I love it. Yeah, that's a great call out, and I find myself moving back into snow mode again, and actually looking at slope aspect. And what this shows me is where the sun hits different slopes. So I can use this to determine where I can expect a lot of snow melt and pretty big water crossings. And that helps me kind of plan that out, ahead of time as well. So I'm not caught off guard when I head towards the southern or western slope of a mountain, and all of a sudden there's this impassable river because I arrived in the late afternoon. So just wanted to call that out. We have so many different layers and tools that help you make good decisions before you even get out there, and I highly recommend using them. Okay, enough about that. Let's talk about day two a little bit.
Yeah, let's dive into it. I think this day, let's I don't know, go a little bit further. It looks like as we look at things on the map, it looks like we have a campground over there on kind of that east side, northeast side. So that's a possible destination, but let's start mapping. So this is where that high overview comes into place and you can kind of see what you're working with. So I think 17-ish miles sounds like a big day, but also a day willing to go for it. If we wanted to go a little bit shorter, it does look like there's, at least if we zoom in a little and see the topos and some notable places to zero in on. I think there's going to be other, zoom in a little bit more. Yeah, it looks like as that other trail intersects up there, we have on the north top right a little bit. There's we could end a little sooner if we wanted to, but I think we're willing to go all the way to that cloud cap area. I don't know where we are currently, but so yeah, this is when, as you're tracing each day out, you can know, and I always like to note bailout points, or if I don't make it to it. So just as we map that, it looks like there is a pretty good creek and some waterfalls leading up to it. So we have plenty of options if we're not going to quite cover that 16.8 miles, and it's quite a bit of uphill, but this is also the biggest or the only full day of our trip. So I think we bite off a big chunk of this and get all the way to that cloud cap campground area.
Yeah, I love it. That's a good call out too, is using these markers on the base map to kind of guesstimate where you think there would be good camping opportunities. And when I map it out, I even see a divot in the elevation map. So I'm assuming this is a lower place and potentially has, an established dispersed campsite. That's awesome. And a good call out too on the bailout points. Let's say we're kind of in over our heads. Maybe we didn't pack micro spikes and we're experiencing some snow. We have options on getting back to trailheads, and those routes are mapped out for us. So you can waypoint them, or you can just note them mentally. Also, when you download the offline map, you'll still have access to these kind of bailouts that run along the northern end here.
Yeah, and as I'm mapping trails or planning routes, I always like to note the bailout point, but also it doesn't mean that the bailout point means you automatically hit a road. Here, you're not going to hit any roads other than Cloud Cap and directly at Timberline Lodge, but you do have Lolo Pass Road where it's a couple miles out to the road. It is a climb. And so just knowing that if things are not going well at the halfway point, or maybe you do pass the road. I may have misspoke. It's knowing the things like that on deciding if an injury or something, and knowing that the next bailout point is Cloud Cap from here. So I always like to do that on the Uinta Highline Trail, especially remote. That was a pretty big thing because once you get, you can do a 100-mile version or a little bit shorter, but I did the 100-mile version. And once you get to mile 30, basically 70 miles to the next real access to civilization. So it's knowing that commitment's ahead of you, and maybe you're completely comfortable, but it's always just good to know, assuming, you want to be prepared for the worst and just know what could happen out there. And you don't need to expect it by any means, but I always just like to have a general lay of what's a good option. Even weather can be a thing, even if you're the healthiest, fittest, best person. You could have a pack rip, you could have bad weather come in, you could drink water and get sick or something. So the general lay of the land, and as we finish up the route and download offline maps too, I think it's important to over download just so that you have a good lay of what could be happening.
Yeah, great call out. I actually bailed out on the Timberline Trail towards Lolo Pass when I did it the second time. And that was because I was heading towards the northern face of Mount Hood, and there were these crazy snow bridges that were kind of covering up all sorts of minor streams and creeks. And I just didn't trust myself in terms of my weight punching through and breaking a leg. And I was out there alone. So decided, this is too much risk that I'm not willing to take. And I knew that I had a bailout point there using the map. And actually, this is the PCT here, the Pacific Crest Trail. So I knew that I had actually walked this before and knew that there was a road crossing here, but I also saw it on the map and knew that I could hitchhike from here or walk down the road and get to the main highway. So great call out on like just knowing where you are and knowing what your options are at all times.
Yeah, cool and smart bailing out. It's especially on this, even the creek crossings and snow bridges, as you spoke of. And in the past, I've done this trail and there's been really bad deadfall early in the year. And if that's not the experience that's going to be enjoyable or the useful use of your time, it's really helpful to know those bailout points, and you can spend the last couple of days some other way. And yeah, it looks on this is, I think, how I said that it doesn't cross the road. That's like where using the color coded options is really smart, because I do believe the PCT goes straight and that's where that turn comes into play. And yeah, color coding, I think that's where it can be super valuable, is knowing that that turn's a big one. The PCT is going to be very well established, and it sure would be rough to keep going straight and then have to turn around and come back.
You're talking about within the trail, like you're hiking the Timberline Trail and you accidentally make a
Yeah,
left
exactly.
here instead of a right.
Yep, exactly. It's super easy to do because it's not a super intuitive turn. I've been to that turn a couple times, and the PCT is intuitive, and you'll end up in Canada if you keep going.
I don't know if we budgeted enough time for that.
Yeah, so yeah, we landed amongst Cloud Cap for night 2. So pretty established campground, and you already went over the resources and clicking on it and things like that. And as you can see, if after 2 days things aren't going well, it's a possible bailout spot. Also would find that sometimes there's some people camped up there, sometimes there's not. So it's kind of knowing what you're working with as well when you're hitting the roads. Not all are the most well traveled, but this, our last night, we will be in a fairly established campground with some amenities, and then we will finish up for day 3.
And trade some war stories with fellow travelers, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. They'll be super impressed as you hobble in and hopefully share with you some good food, and then you'll have the next day to get back to the car and celebrate it at Timberline Lodge.
Love it. Let's get back to Timberline.
Yeah,
So
let's do
again,
it.
I'll throw down one trace here on the beginning of the route, and then just bring it all the way around here to Timberline. We'll finish right at the parking lot. So it looks like day 3's a hair over 13 miles, and as you had foretold, it is mostly downhill.
Yep. And yeah, that's kind of a nice thing. Also, I think this kind of highlights the way of planning a trip and separating it. If it's 40 miles, it's obviously 13.3 each day, but that's not how it's going to work out, because you got to get to the trail and you want to leave on the last day. So I always like to budget a good chunk in that middle day, and this kind of leaves us room to have dinner at Timberline and drive the hour back to Portland, and then only asking 10 miles of ourselves on that first day gives us time to get up there and get going and get to Ramona Falls. So I think that's why I like the individually tracing each day on top of the entire thing, because it really lets you decide for yourself after seeing the stats on each day. Is this something I'm comfortable with? Is this something I can potentially do?
Yeah, I love that. And what I like to do as well is actually, once I've done all this, I will add all of these all these waypoints and tracks to a folder or a trip, as we call it. And then I can refer to all of them together and have all the information together. So I'm actually going to create a trip here and then add those waypoints to them.
Smart. Yeah. Beat me to it. It's the best way.
I think I have some other stuff in here too.
Yeah, I think it's those 3 is what we did. Yeah.
Perfect. And then, yeah, you can see all of those ready to use in that folder. And what's really nice too is I can actually share this out. So if anyone wants to go on the trip with me, I don't know why they would. I'm pretty stinky out there. I could actually share this link out with folks. So I'll share it in the chat here for people who are curious. And you can use that link whether you have a basic account, a premium, or an elite account. You just need to have an Onyx account. You can view everything that I just put in that trip, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most underrated features of Onyx too, is all in-app copy and then paste it into a message or anything. I think that is really cool, especially because, as everyone knows, there's always one person in the group who is the over planner and will make sure everyone has everything. And it just makes it so easy. If you are the lucky person to go with that person on a hike, they will have done most of your planning for you, and they'll have all your campsites, and you can just discuss more of the finer points and logistics and who's bringing the bottle of wine.
The last thing I want to show folks is let's just imagine we planned the trip. We feel really dialed on it. I've shared it with Jeff, even though Jeff created it. Thank you, Jeff, for being the super prepared person. I just want to briefly show how to then import that onto my phone, because this is probably the most important part, is actually making this into an offline map that I can use in the field. So I'm going to use our offline map feature here to create a offline map that covers the entirety of the area and maybe even a little bit more, give myself a little bit of buffer in case I need to look outside of the bounds of.
And you're zooming to make it bigger and smaller, basically.
Exactly.
With the same resolution.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that I have any potential bailout point covered here in whatever, and you know, like I may even say like, this is great. This is going to be my Timberline Trail offline map. But maybe I even want more than that. So I'll save that, and it's telling me that it's going to be saved to my account, which is awesome. But I might even just do another offline map as well, and cover a greater area of like bailout points. So like create an overlapping map basically, in case I want to in case I want to check out the PCT, or if I want to see how to get to this bailout point, I might do an extra offline map. Generally, it's not necessary, but if you're doing an even bigger trip, it might be wise to download several offline maps.
Yeah, and if it's not a loop too, it's really nice to link the offline maps, because if it's a straight line, you don't need 100 miles east to west if you're just going north to south. So super cool showing the overlap. My phone is full of overlapped maps.
That's a good call. And now I'm gonna quickly show what it looks like on my phone once I've downloaded the map. So I will just share my screen here, and I will show you what the app looks like on my phone. I think I gotta stop sharing here. Can folks see my phone here?
I cannot.
Should come up.
Ooh, here we go.
Awesome. So I'm on my phone. Here's Onyx Backcountry. I'm going to open it up, and it should zoom me right into the last place I was looking at, which is Mount Hood, Epic. And if I click on offline maps, I can see that it's been sent to my phone, which is awesome. And all I have to do is click on that download button, and it'll download my offline map for me, including all the content that I've just created, waypoints, routes, lines, etc. One thing I really like to do once it's downloaded is I'll actually take my map into offline mode by pressing go offline, just to make sure that all that rich content that I was looking at is still accessible to me when the app is offline. Because there's no worse feeling than getting out into the field and realizing that you have a blank map because you didn't download the base map. So it looks like I have. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Jeff.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, or just holding your head or your hand above your head, trying to get it to download while out there. But also it shares really intuitively too from the app as well as the computer version or the online version. So that's the other thing is I probably create most stuff just straight on my phone too. So I think everything we kind of discussed, it can work directly on your phone as well. So super seamless.
Yeah, totally. Everything that we looked at and did, we can actually do on our phone. So I can look at it in 3D mode. I can create waypoints. I can create routes. It's all doable on a phone as well, which is really cool because 3D really helps you hone in on what you're going to be chewing off. So I'll stop sharing here. If I can get out. I'm sorry. Technical difficulties a little bit. And then I think we should get into some Q&A. I know folks had some really good questions for us.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. I'm just going to pull up some
Yeah,
Q&A.
while you get one ready, I will share one final thing I do with adventures if you got question ready. So I always, after we go on this hike, we did our hike, this is when I like to make some notes of what worked well, what didn't work well, whether in Onyx, like, did I not like the stream crossings? I'll know to avoid it for next time or to pay attention on the map. Did I really love waterfalls? I think the last part in the planning process, it really starts in the last adventure when you note what you liked, what you didn't like. And that's how it flows into mapping and planning the next adventure. So it's all kind of linked, and this progression towards improving skills and honing in on max enjoyment when you're out there.
Love it. That's awesome. Yeah, it's great to help relive too, and it's a really nice if you're returning or even if you are just wanting to relive, just remembering what happened and having like a breadcrumb of what you did is really nice for nostalgia and also for not repeating mistakes. I'm gonna pull up some questions here, Jeff. We have one
Cool.
about how to plan around timing or mileage or elevation. And I'll just share the
Yeah,
screen as well.
broad level, usually most things in life come down to this is my time window. And so that's usually when I hone in on what is an acceptable distance that I can go, and then what is acceptable for elevation, vert. So elevation and vert, I think of elevation as what height you're at. So if you go to Colorado, it might be 10,000 feet. Might not be doable if you're at sea level because altitude sickness and things like that. So that's elevation. And then vert is how much are you climbing. A 10-mile day with no climbing is a lot different than a 5-mile day with 5,000 feet of climbing. So those are the three factors, and how I kind of plan that is once I get my time window of, let's say, July, then this is when I sort of figure out what kind of year, what my options are. If my options here are going to be the Timberline Trail, the Wonderland Trail, or something in the Sierra Nevadas, it's like, well, I only have 3 days. The Wonderland Trail is going to be maybe a little too long, so I'm not going to do that. And the Sierra just had record snowfall. It's going to be questionable and dicey in July. And so that's kind of how I would land amongst something like the Timberline Trail. And then when you land among, usually come down to 3 or 4 options. So maybe it's the Timberline Trail, the Gallatin Crest Trail, and a few nights in North Cascades. And this is when mapping it out and having that overview of the route. I have, I don't know, 20 or 30 that I haven't even done saved on my phone that I've routed and mapped that I can do in the future, but they were all part of the planning process of what am I dealing with? And then I can back into which one is going to fit for my schedule here. So just narrow it down like a funnel, usually go through that early planning process of one complete trip routed in each of those areas. And then that's when it kind of just comes to a head and you know what's going to work out the best with your schedule once you get to that level.
That was a great answer. Thank you. I have a question here on interpreting current conditions. I know I talked a little bit about SNOTEL, but I didn't mention something even more useful in my opinion, and that's our historic and active wildfire layer, which shows what wildfires occurred. And you can see there was one on the north part of the Timberline Trail here. I'll just put it into satellite mode. So it'll tell you the year that it happened, how big it was, and it'll also show you the outline. But we also have active wildfire layers, and I don't think there are any in the Timberline area right now, but it'll show you fires that are ongoing right now. And we've also introduced air quality, so AQI, as well as a smoke forecast, which really help you with what kind of current conditions you can expect while you're recreating in whatever area you are within the US. So super helpful layers, and great question. Thank you for asking it.
Yeah, and there's a number of resources and things, and this is where there's that ancillary aspect to anything. Technology can probably get us 80 to 90% of the way there, and there is always that checking in. Always and forever, ranger stations and people with boots on the ground are going to be an awesome resource. I know we never call anyone anymore, but there's no shame in giving them a call and asking, I'm going to hike the Timberline Trail in 2 weeks. Are there any closures to worry about? What's the water level of the zigzag in the Sandy River? They are so happy to help you because it means they won't have to rescue you. So making use of those resources is something we should all do a little bit more of.
Nice. I'll just kind of rapid fire some questions at you. Uh, any tips or pointers for a single day push? I'm looking to run it in late summer.
Yeah, tips: start early and know your water. The number one thing when you're going to do a big taxing effort is to know your water sources and make sure that you use them. I've actually done this trail and gotten quite dehydrated because it was a long push between them. I assume you have nutrition, food, and all that dialed in, but start early and know your water are kind of the two big things for a big day.
Nice. How much photography gear do you take, and what's the weight of it?
Not a ton. Sometimes I'll take a tripod if I'm trying to do like a little time lapse or something at night with long exposure, but maybe 2 to 4 pounds. I am amateur. It is a fun hobby. I am never wanting to be professional. It's just really fun to pick up a new skill that I decided I wanted to take on during the pandemic. So not a lot. It's my hobby item, and yeah, it's not a lot, but pack something that brings you more enjoyment out there.
You're here. What are some recommendations for how to know if you will need a permit? I know we talked about the Timberline only needing a self-issue permit, but how might one find out whether it's necessary or not?
So things like the icon that you clicked on for rec.gov in the Onyx thing, and also anything you're going to do, you're probably going to want to do a couple general Google searches of trail closures on the Timberline Trail. Also, are permits necessary on the Timberline Trail? I could send you to backpacking routes, but that's quite biased. There are a number of resources out there, and I think there's 3 or 4 things that change every year. Like recently, the Sisters Wilderness implemented more of a permit and quota system. Everything updates and changes over time. So while I could say there's one catch-all method, it's just something that is worth looking up in respect to each trail. I think this one's fairly easy. Also, calling a ranger station, once again, they will know too.
Awesome. That's great. I'm gonna do one more question, and then
Cool.
we'll move into the giveaway part, which I know everyone's excited about. Will the unsupported FKT movie Free Outside show anywhere near Nashville, Tennessee, Jeff?
I don't know. Yeah, this movie about setting the record on the Colorado Trail featuring me. We'll definitely do LA, probably Arizona. We may get it out east. I hope maybe Chattanooga, but who knows? So yeah, we'll see. Still recovering from the last showings. They're exhausting.
More exhausting than the FKT?
Oh yeah, way more.
Well, awesome. Thanks folks for hanging in there. I'd like to extend that discount or extended trial for premium or elite to folks who stuck around. Feel free to give that a scan. I also want to call out that Jeff has an incredible book that you should really pick up, and it's called The Free Outside. And Jeff, I'll let you plug it properly because I won't do it justice.
Yeah. Well, we couldn't afford the extra so it's just called Free Outside. Yeah, it's anywhere books are sold, Amazon, everything. You can shoot me a message on Instagram and we can figure out how to get you a personally signed copy too. And yeah, it's about hiking the calendar year Triple Crown and a lot of the things we talked about with planning come directly from this adventure I did when I was 25, as far as swimming a frozen river, not losing a microspike, not knowing what I'm dealing with, getting to resupplies when they are closed. So all this knowledge is from years of adventuring, and some of it's in the book, but hopefully you gained a little bit of wisdom or tips and tricks that you got to learn from me learning the hard way.
Yeah, it's a great book. I can't recommend it enough. Pick it up and read it, and get a signed copy. Sometimes Jeff will sign it with his foot.
I will, yeah, or a croc.
All right, folks. The moment you've been waiting for. We have a giveaway. We're giving away 25 Onyx Backcountry hats. Just scan that QR code, and you will be entered in to win. Entries close at midnight tonight, April 20th, 2023. I'll let this stay up for a little bit, but otherwise, thank you so much for hanging in there with us. We really appreciate you. I hope you learned something. I really enjoyed talking to you, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun and cool to talk about a trail we both got to have fun on. I didn't even know you had to bail out once on there.
I know. Yeah, I was with my sister actually, and I was taking her out on her first multi-day trip. And it was her first time hiking on snow. She didn't have any micro spikes. So we got as far as we could, and got to a point where we both were like, this isn't that fun anymore. Let's get out of here.
I love it. Yeah, super smart and good lesson too. Pass along.
Definitely. She just did the JMT last year, the John Muir Trail. So she's definitely leveled up and learned a lot on the Timberline.
Awesome. Yeah, no, this was fun. I'm glad we got to share and talk in front of a couple hundred of our closest friends.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and please stick around for a survey at the end. We'll email out to you, and your responses are really instructive in how we form these master classes in the future. So please let us know what you want to hear, who you want to hear from, and we'll make sure we put on a bunch of these in the future.
Sweet. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks so much. Take care.